and welcome back to another edition of the Benchwarmer Sports Podcast. Raffi here, joined by Davian. Davian, NFL trade deadline has come and gone, and with that, there was actually a lot of action that we'll get into very shortly. There was quite a couple trades, a couple of big blockbuster trades that we'll definitely dive into and give our thoughts on shortly. But before we get into that, as always, Davian, how are you? How are things? And yeah, we're going to have a pretty interesting conversation about some of these trades and some of what some of the teams did do and what some of these teams didn't do in the NFL.
Yeah, I'm doing great, Raffi. The Patriots won this past weekend against the Falcons. Yay! Because they missed the extra point. You know, so sad.
That did happen.
Yeah. You know, they...
keep losing in Falcons' ways.
No, the Falcons
and the Falcons.
23 points. You know, kind of sad. Any case, moving on. Yeah, I mean, NFL trade deadline was that was a buzz. I mean, the Jets just were just blowing up my phone, basically. You know, what an interesting afternoon that, you know, we saw, you know, coming from the NFL. But Raffi, let's get into it. Let's start off with the Raffi, what do you want to start off with? The best trade or the least kind of like exciting trade?
Let's just dive right in. I have all the trades pulled up right now, so we can just go one by one. Let's just dive into the big one of the two big ones, and obviously both of these involved in New York Jets. We'll start off with the first one, Sauce Gardner. This is the big one that happened, dropped earlier on in the day where you weren't really expecting too much action. The Jets overall, we were expecting the Jets to make a couple of trades, Breece Hall, Jermaine Johnson, two players that we highlighted in our last week's podcast. If those who had checked it out, great job. If you haven't, if you want to factor us, so check us, go ahead. But neither of us really mentioned the possibility of Sauce Gardner. I know pretty well I said that him and Garrett Wilson would be locks. It wouldn't make any sense, especially because you just paid both of them. Why? And they're both relatively young, still 25, 26 years old. And overall, I think the sentiment was from the Jets, if you want one of our best players, you are going to have to pay. You are going to have to meet our price. And I think this trade was the Jets saying you need to meet the price, and the Colts said, you know what? We're going all in. We're 7-8-1 this year. We're going 7-1 or 8-1, not quite literally 7-8-1. Not that I need to clarify that. But anyways, the Colts are an all-in push right now. So they give up 2 first-round picks, their own this year, their own next year, and Adonai Mitchell, who has shown flashes but had a very, very, really bad game a few weeks ago, as we all remember, where he dropped the ball, celebrating too early before, and then also had another fumble, or it just had one of the worst games that you could possibly put together. So he also gets traded to the Jets. And Davian, I really like this trade for both teams. The Colts, you get some help on the secondary. Yes, Sauce Gardner isn't as good as he was a couple of years ago, but still is a really solid player as a whole. And for the Jets, I think this is a good trade for them, because if you were going to trade a guy like Sauce Gardner, I would hope that you'd be getting a return up to the standard. And when we'll talk about the other trades too. Obviously, the Jets do need to hit on these picks, but from just a pure perspective, I like this move for the Jets, which is very interesting to say, because when you had sent me the text saying Sauce Gardner has been traded, I immediately said, oh, he's definitely going to trade for like a first-round pick, or the Jets definitely are going to blow this trade.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what I'll say is that you never see a corner get traded for 2 first-round picks, but that's because of how generational of a talent, you know, Sauce Gardner is. But I will say specifically, you know, I think it was a good trade for the Jets, right? You have somebody in their prime that you won't be able to. They didn't win with Wilson, with Sauce Gardner or Quentin Williams. That's just the honest truth about it, right? 2 key defensive pieces, and since Saleh left as head coach, this defense has not been looking good, even though they have those 2 cornerstones on the D-line and in the secondary. Trading those both pieces away is, it starts off clearly a rebuild, but you also are able to build up a lot of draft capital, where now, heading into the next, into this upcoming NFL draft, you can draft a QB, because that's basically what they're going to do, most likely. And you can draft somebody around them, whether it's an offensive lineman, a speedster, like another wide receiver, which, you know, technically you really don't need, since you already have Garrett Wilson. They didn't trade Breece Hall. They kept the offense really intact, you know, and I think they did that on purpose to ensure that the next quarterback that comes in has a better, system built around them. With that being said, though, I think it's if I was to grade this trade for the Colts, I think it's an A. For the Jets, I think it's an A plus. I think just for the Colts, the risk that you're taking is that you're trading away 2 first round picks, right? For a corner, which is that's where the issue is. Like, yes, it's an elite corner. It's a clear boost to your secondary. This is your all-in year, but still, it's a risk that they're taking.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, though, if corner is your biggest weak spot and you're going to be one of the top teams in the AFC this year, or at least the top four, because they are likely going to win the AFC South, barring a colossal collapse where Daniel Jones reverts back to New York Giants Daniel Jones and just looks like an absolute pumpkin. I do like this trade for both teams. And for the Jets, too, I think another wrinkle is the fact that they did pay Sauce Gardner a very, very big extension and a very big contract. And not saying that was going to be a poor aging contract, because, again, he's still very young. But I think it's good. You free up that money as well, so that's not something that is at the forefront anymore. And, again, Sauce Gardner, we all need to think, like, perspective here. When the Jets, and again, this is comical to say, because let's be honest here, it's the Jets. They always enter the 5-year rebuild, and when the 5-year rebuild ends, they're like, okay, time for another 5-year rebuild. But in theory, when you look at a rebuild, 4 years, I think, for NFL teams, 3 to 4 years, 5 years, then you're back up. In 4 or 5 years, Sauce Gardner is going to be almost 30 at that point, if not already 30. So then he's immediately going to be on the decline, especially corner is a position where I feel like there's a little bit more of a sharper decline. Speaking of players who got traded from the Jets, secondary, who got traded for Hall, Jamal Adams got traded. It was such a big trade. People couldn't believe it. And his play really tailed off over the last final years of his time in Seattle, and then it's kind of become irrelevant the past couple of years. So for the Jets, I understand the thought process. When we're good again, which again it's the Jets. It's the Jets, so who knows when they'll be good again. But in theory, if the rebuild works as you think in theory, by the time the Jets are good again and rising back into playoff relevancy, Sauce Gardner is already going to be at the point where he's going to be getting worse overall. So I agree. I think that the reasoning was right. I think it's also a good idea now for just us to group in the Quinnen Williams trade, where the Dallas Cowboys, yes, they only have 3 wins this year. I believe they're 3-5-1. They acquired Quinnen Williams, and then they give up Mozzie Smith, who was, we can call it what it is. He's an NFL draft bust. Yes, he was drafted only 2 years ago, but overall, the past 2 years has shown that he's really not that guy. Maybe he turns things around in New York. Yeah. We've seen players who get off to poor starts, they get a change of scenery, and then they look better, but so far, he does not.
I don't fully get this trade, Raffi. I'll be honest. I just want to jump in real quick. I just don't fully get it for the Cowboys because it's like, you get Quinnen Williams, a key defensive piece, right after you let go of Micah Parsons, and now you have like a formidable, I guess, defensive line. You're boosting your defense, but you're still like, look at your record, look at the teams, look at your division. Coming back from, what's their record again, Raffi?
3-5-1, I believe.
Yeah, you're 3-5-1. I'm sorry. The playoffs are possible, but you don't have that easy of a schedule coming up, even just like in your division too. So, I don't really see. It's a great trade. I think they traded the right amount of value away, and you get a great. And they have other first round picks, of course, because of the Micah Parsons trade. But I'm not a big fan of it, Raffi. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually do like this deal for the Cowboys.
Yeah, okay.
They had a glaring need. At run stopper, and obviously you could have fixed that if you just paid Micah Parsons. But if the money really was an issue, you're getting a guy who's relatively cheaper in comparison to Micah Parsons. Still is a game wrecker in his own right. Obviously not to Micah Parsons' level, but in Quinnen Williams, you're getting one of the best run stoppers in the NFL. Still relatively young too, so I do think that it's a high price that they had to pay, a first and a second round pick, and obviously a former first round pick, albeit if we did a redraft, he probably wouldn't even be drafted. He's just been that poor, or at least he'd be a day 3 pick at that point, and a shot in the dark type of pick. But I honestly really do like this deal for the Cowboys, especially because you have the term on his contract as well. If this was only a 1 year, I'd feel a little like, I don't really know. Because again, as you mentioned, they have 3 wins. But this is an investment. He's still under contract, I believe, for at least another 2 years, if not another 3 years. So in my mind, at least you have that control. So you're not only paying for just this back half of the season, you're paying for the next at least 2 years as well. So for the Cowboys, obviously, you just would rather have Michael Parsons and have paid him when you should have, and you'd have him for a whole lot cheaper, and he'd be fantastic. But honestly, I don't hate this deal for the Cowboys. And for the Jets, as we talked about previously, my same logic applies. By the time, in theory, this is going to be a podcast where I say in theory at least 20 times, especially talking about the Jets. But, say one more time, in theory, when the Jets are good again, after this rebuild, Quinnen Williams is going to be 31, 32 years old. He's going to start to decline a little bit in all likelihood. You might as well, it's good to just get out, get the new picks, and then I don't like the idea of getting picks, trading good players for draft picks, because you get into the whole mystery box conversation where it's like, well, we could trade in the boat for a mystery box, and the mystery box can be anything. It could even be another boat. So it just doesn't make sense. But in terms of the Jets, I do think you need a rebuild. And again, I think we're both in agreement that the big thing for them was holding on to Garrett Wilson, because whoever you're putting in as the quarterback next year, because I think we're both in agreement they're going to be drafting a quarterback this year in this upcoming NFL draft, you want to at least give them some chance to succeed out the gate. Because if you look at guys like Tua Tagovailoa, you look at Zach Wilson, who's a New York Jet, Sam Darnold and Zach Wilson, if you look at the wide receiver cores they had when they entered the NFL, now, albeit both of them did have their own issues, both of them were rather raw, they had horrendous wide receiving cores. Yeah. They had no offensive lineup. So for the Jets, I think the big thing was keeping that offense as intact as possible. Lastly, before we just move off the Jets, I do want to also mention, too, the whole Breece Hall thing. Apparently that he was on the table for a third-round pick. I had said last week that if I was a team that needed a running back, and there's plenty of contenders, like the Chiefs especially, that I really do think, bless you, that was such a random sneeze. You kind of said something that I was saying as well. Right. You look at the Chiefs and some other teams, why don't you just add Breece Hall for a third-round pick? But the Chiefs are like, we will only do a fourth-round pick. I don't get it personally. If third-round pick for Breece Hall, I'm doing that 100 times out of 100, in my personal opinion. That third-round pick likely won't amount to Breece Hall's caliber. So that's the one final thought that I had on the Jets. David, any thoughts on the Jets, or do we want to move on to another team?
Yeah, I think we just kind of see a different eye to eye. I get your point as well, but I just don't think that, selling out, I think it's a good for the rebuild. I just disagree with the Cowboys being the receiving end for Quinnen Williams, but I think the Jets in general, we both see eye to eye with their rebuild and how they should be going about it. Moving on to another, the Jets were the ones who made the biggest noise, but the Seahawks traded for Rashid Shaheed from the Saints for a 4th and 5th round pick, which is very interesting because what Rashid brings to the team is speed. And what you saw last week from Torrey Horton, their rookie 5th round pick, was speed. So the question is, why would you bring in more speed? I think for the Seahawks, it's kind of like a pick where it's, look, we're a good team. We need another key piece. And with Cooper Kupp going down with injuries, you needed a third wide receiver. You needed a second wide receiver that was really good. And I think that's what Shaheed provides. For the Saints, look, the Saints are who the Saints are. I think that they just, they saw a good trade. It's a valuable trade, I think. And, building up draft capital when you're clearly in a rebuilding year, I think is huge. So.
Yep, and I'm glad they didn't go out and trade Chris Olave. It seemed like that likely wasn't going to happen, and I'm glad they didn't because, again, as we said, the Jets having neither Olave or Garrett Wilson, I'd say, are top 10 wide receivers, but they are top 15, top 20 wide receivers. Having one of those with a rookie quarterback, I think, is very important and cannot be understated enough, especially when you look at quarterbacks that struggle versus quarterbacks that don't struggle right out the gate. And overall, again, 4th and 5th round pick, that's a fine price to pay for Rashid Shaheed. Shaheed also, last year, when under current Seahawks offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak's offense, he was so dynamic. And before his injury that took him out for the entire season, it felt like every game he had a 70-yard plus touchdown. He has big play potential. Again, that's a lot. It's boom or bust with him, especially in fantasy terms. If you want a guy, and he could potentially get 30 points, he could potentially get 5 points, but overall, from a team construction perspective, you have a guy who has familiarity with the offensive coordinator. He's had success with this offensive coordinator. I understand you don't want to have too much of the same, but I think Shahid is going to be a great addition to this Seahawks offense where Jackson Smith and Jigba has just really balled out. Moving over to another wide receiver trade, Jacoby Myers, former Patriot, Davian, getting traded from the Jaguars, or getting traded to the Jaguars from the Raiders, for a 4th and 6th round pick. Pretty similar trade, pretty similar circumstances. The Jaguars, Travis Hunter is on IR. You have Brian Thomas Jr., who's had some drop issues. You bring in a guy who has had a 1,000-yard season, has only had 2 drops, I believe, this entire season for the Raiders. And overall, Jacoby Myers, he's not going to be your number 1 wide receiver by any means, but for a wide receiver too, I mean, you could do a heck of a lot worse than Jacoby Myers. I actually really like this trade for the Jaguars, especially for the injury issues and for Brian Thomas Jr. picking up a sudden case of the dropsies. I like this trade a lot for Jacksonville. And for the Raiders, he's on an expiring contract. He's made it clear that he wants to leave, so you get some draft capital value. I think this is a win-win trade for both sides, personally.
Yeah, I don't think there's much to really add on to that. I mean, he is a good. Wasn't he like the number 1 wide receiver in terms of stats for the Raiders, right? I believe,
yes.
Yeah, he was. So it's like,
if you include tight end, Brock Bowers was ahead.
Yeah,
but
Brock Bowers.
If we're talking about solely wide receivers,
he was the best
Jacoby
wide
Myers.
receiver on the team. So at the end of the day, I mean, look, he had a 1 foot out the door. The Jaguars needed to. The Jaguars are a team that's not doing too bad. So at the end of the day, given their record, given where they stand and everything, at 5-3, it was worth it to do that trade. Because Travis Hunter goes down, at least you have another wide receiver now, and another target for Trevor Lawrence. And now when Travis Hunter comes back, you can now see if you actually want to play him on offense or defense. You can actually have the abilities to play around because you have another solid wide receiver on the team.
Yeah, and again, you look at in the healthy situation, you have Travis Hunter, Brian Thomas Jr., and Jacoby Myers. That's a solid trio of wide receivers.
Yeah.
I really do think, especially if Brian Thomas Jr. can play more like his last year self down the stretch this year for the Jaguars. I actually do like this Jaguars offense a lot. Basil Toon's been solid. Travis Etienne has had a really solid bounce back year so far. Nothing special, but at least way better than last year, where Tank Bigsby was splitting carries with him. It was Tank Bigsby of all guys. But anyway, sorry for the Tank Bigsby slander. If you're watching this podcast, we'd love to have you on at some point. But for this Jaguars team, I actually do like their wide receiver trio now. I think that's a really solid receiving group at this point. And it might be, honestly, no, it definitely is the best wide receiver trio that Trevor Lawrence has had since joining the Jaguars after being drafted. Let's move over to another team that was looking to tear things down. They did make one trade, and that's the Miami Dolphins. They trade Jalen Phillips to the Philadelphia Eagles for a 3rd-round pick. Davian, I think I touched on this a little bit. I think you talked a little bit more about Jalen Phillips on our last week's podcast, but overall, your thoughts on the trade? I honestly think it's a solid trade, solid value, good upside bet with if Jalen Phillips can play to his potential, which is a big if because he has been consistently injured, unfortunately, and even this year he hasn't gotten off to a great start. But if he hits, he could be a really solid slam dunk for the Eagles. But for the Dolphins, I was a little surprised that this was really the only move that they wound up making. I would have imagined that they'd make a couple more trades, especially when the Jets were just saying, you can get traded, you're all getting traded, like, etc.
Yeah, we'll go into that, like teams that I thought should have been more active on the trading front. The Saints being one of them. The Titans, barely did anything, I felt. So those are teams I really thought would do more, and of course the Dolphins as well. I think this is a great trade by the Dolphins. You get good value for a player that has been injury prone. For the Eagles, Howie Roseman, I mean, man, oh man, the fact that he's continuously fortifying this team, A trade like this can really be the difference maker in the playoffs, or it can be a difference maker in these like really close games that they have. Because at the end of the day, the Eagles team has not been that great. They've beat teams, they have a good record, but they've also had really crushing losses against teams that they really shouldn't have had. So, I think it's definitely a very good piece for them on both sides. I think the Eagles definitely won this trade more than the Dolphins because, there could have been more value that the Dolphins could have gotten from other teams potentially, but third round pick, I'd take that.
Yep. And overall, a lot of these other trades were more or less smaller. So for the sake of time, Davian, if there's anything that you do want to mention, I'll throw it over to you. But also, if there's really nothing that catches your eye at this point, we kind of covered the main trades that occurred. So if you want, we can also get into just your overall thoughts on teams that you were expecting to be a little bit more active, teams that you thought could have done a little bit more. Overall, your thoughts on that as well, because
there's some,
that's always like the second aspect of the trade deadline,
right? Of
where
course,
it's not only the teams that made the trades. It's you can still be a winner by not doing anything, and you can still be a loser by not doing anything.
Of course,
I think that's still a possibility.
I think that's a huge point. I think there's a couple of trades definitely do want to talk about. The Joe Tyrone Shoyinka trade from the Browns to the Bears. The Bears, again, a team that like the Brown, just like fortifying their edge, their D line. I think that's a good pickup for them. And then the Logan Wilson trade. I mean, Logan Wilson's just not that great. And the Cowboys barely sent anything to really get Logan Wilson. That was earlier in the day before the Quinn Williams trade. So a lot of people are like, "Oh, so this is Jerry Jones' answer to the defense." Like,
that was so funny.
Which was really funny.
That was so funny how Monday Night Football, he's like, "Hey, we got a really big trade coming. You guys are going to like this." And then the morning, everyone wakes up. It's,
what? Yeah.
And this was like at 8 a.m. too, Central Time. It's Zach Wilson was
yeah.
Logan Wilson was a trade? Yeah. Sorry, I just gave Jets.
No, I thought Zach Wilson for a sec too when I saw that. And I was like, wait, Logan Wilson? Like, he's just not been that great, honestly, lately. And it's just like...
He's lost snaps. He's essentially been benched, essentially. And I understand why he wants to get traded, because obviously...
Yeah, of course. Like, I just don't think this fortifies the linebacking core. I really don't... There's just like an extra person on the depth chart.
It's funny because the Cowboys are looking to improve their linebacking core. So they acquired a guy who was benched on a team who somehow has a worse linebacking core than the Dallas Cowboys. So maybe things turn around for Logan Wilson. He has been a good linebacker in the past. He's just had a really poor year this year.
Yeah.
Leading to him getting benched and now just leading to him getting traded for a subpar return, a 7th round pick. But I'm not going to lie. It's kind of funny how everything evolved from Jerry Jones saying a big trade's coming down, and that was the first trade that dropped. And then also the other aspect, too, of you're trying to improve your linebacking core. Okay, let's acquire a guy who got benched at linebacker on the Cincinnati Bengals, or even worse. So that's just my 2 cents. Honestly, just diving in with the Bengals, too, I know there's a Jair Alexander trade, but unfortunately he's just drifted into irrelevancy. He's really had a terrible season in Baltimore, so we'll see if he can turn things around in Philly. But overall, your thoughts on Cincy, Davian? Do you think... I personally think they should have traded Trey Hendrickson, especially if Burrow's coming back in the month of November. I'd say hold, try to make a push, but since he's not coming back till week 16 or week 17, you might as well just try to trade him now. If not, I guess they can wait till the offseason anyways. They'll still have some team control, but in my mind, it was just you now might be the best time to get that value just because he's playing on the franchise tag and you can potentially maneuver some money, etc., to make that work.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't get why they didn't trade him. I think there's just teams that didn't give enough value in order to trade him, and they might think that they might be able to still get him back. Because that's the thing, Raffi. When there's players that like are on those expiring contracts, you might not be able to get the most amount of value out of it. And this Bengals team is a team that's like you can't really fully count them out this year. Just because Joe Flacco has been playing the worst game ever. And yes, it was a devastating loss against the Bears. And I losing, like to that Cole Loveland, miraculous touchdown. And I really thought that was going to be the catalyst that, when you look at their record, third in the AFC North, the Ravens are clearly going to be climbing up with Lamar Jackson back. We talked about this last week that, this is a do or die game for the Bengals, the rest of their season. I'm shocked that they didn't do it. Maybe they think they still have a chance. Maybe they think they can re-sign him. I don't know why they didn't trade him, but I also don't know why the Titans weren't bigger sellers either. I think there's players there that they could have traded, but I think on the offensive side of the ball, they didn't want to, hurt Cam Ward even more by having less options for him. On the defensive side, Jeffrey Simmons, maybe they just didn't get enough value for a player like that. So, but in any case, Raffi, I mean, what do you think about the Titans? Because I know I switched from, talking about the Bengals to the Titans. You think the Titans should have been bigger sellers, or you think that they did okay?
You can only get so many 6th-round picks, and how many of those 6th-round picks are really going to turn into anything? If the Titans were to really trade anyone that wasn't Simmons, you're not getting much more value than a 5th or 6th-round pick. Maybe you're essentially getting a day 3 pick, if that. And even weapons, you're not going to trade any of the weapons that Cam Ward has. Calvin Ridley has looked a shell of himself. I wouldn't be willing to bet on anything that he's able to bounce back this year.
That's fair.
Or I wouldn't bet on his upside either. He's been injured this year. It's not a player that I'd be willing to take a gamble on this season, and I wouldn't push all my chips in for potentially him having too many gambling jokes about Calvin Ridley. But my point still stands where if there was one guy that could have potentially gotten something, if he was healthy and playing well, it'd be Calvin Ridley. But again, if he was playing well, you wouldn't be trading him because, again, as you said, you don't want to take off players from Cam Ward's very limited arsenal. So I'm not surprised the Titans didn't do much just because they didn't have anyone of value to really trade. You want to keep some of the younger developing guys, and you don't have any, again, aside from Simmons, they really don't have anything of value. It's a bad team. They're really, really bad. I don't want. Can we change the subject about another team? I just don't want to talk about the Titans anymore. Well, let's talk about your team, the Patriots, David, because the Patriots have a ton of cap space.
Don't talk.
Drake May's looked legit. They're off to a great start this year. They play the Jets two times this year. They haven't played them yet.
Yeah,
those are already pretty much 2 automatic wins. Now they have 2 automatic wins, so they'll be at least around the 8 to 9 win mark. Davian, your thoughts on the Patriots?
I just don't get why we weren't active. Like, there's so many players out there. Like, why weren't we bidding for Trey Hendrickson? Why aren't we going after a Calvin Ridley-like player? Why aren't we trying to give May more pieces? Why aren't we trying to fortify the defense more? I really thought that by trading Keon White and Kyle Duggar, that was the start of we're trading these players away, we're getting some draft capital for them, and then we're going to use this to go after more players. And we just didn't. And it's just so frustrating because it's always the same story with the Patriots when it comes to the deadline. There's always like, oh, rumors of them trading for this person, rumors of them signing this person. The Patriots, when it comes to the rumor mill of signing players, it's always been terrible, Raffi. I mean, I remember.
Can you imagine putting a team of Patriots who are like in the rumor mill, like players that were in the rumor mill and linked to the Patriots? You put a team together of all those guys, you'd have a really good team. T. Higgins would be the headliner.
Raffi, there were so many players that, under the when we had Brady, that just didn't come to the team for nobody understood why. Like, of course it was Bill Belichick, and, granted, we won many Super Bowls, so I can't be mad about that. But players like OBJ never came over. There's rumors of Le'Veon Bell back in the day that never came over. Now it's just I don't get why you have so many players that are clear available, so many teams that are selling hard. Yes, fine. The Jets probably not going to trade anybody to the Patriots. Valid, fair, understood. But the Saints, the Titans, these other teams, you could have gotten more pieces from them, and we just didn't. Another team I want to touch on before, Raffi, you touched on the Patriots as well, is the Chiefs. Why aren't you getting a running back? Why are you not trading that 3rd-round pick for Breece Hall? I just don't get that. You have, the team is clearly struggling. You need an extra piece to get over the hump when it comes to playoffs. Your running core really stinks, and if you can't run the ball, you won't be able to succeed. I don't get it. I really don't get it. But any case, Raffi, what are your thoughts? Is there any other team that you'd like to touch on as well, or you think the Patriots and the Chiefs are the ones who kind of take the cake of this?
Yeah, Patriots. I think the Patriots were, again, as you mentioned, and I won't delve too deep into it because you pretty much summed it up perfectly. The 2 big sellers, intended sellers, one that wasn't as active as the other, but were the Jets and Dolphins, and interdivision trading it's a little more lenient than we see in other leagues. NHL, you don't see teams making trades with the rivals at all. The Bruins and Canadiens, if you look back on how many times they've made trades, there's like one minor league trade that they made. And outside, they just do not trade with one another. I don't know if that's the same thing with the AFC East, but there would be a tax on trading players if the Patriots are looking to acquire guys from the Dolphins and the Jets, where two first round picks would turn into 2 first-round picks and a second and an intriguing prospect from the Patriots' perspective. So I can understand why the Patriots didn't do too much, albeit, again, we're both in agreement. You have a lot of cap space. Drake May's on his rookie year. He looks legit. You should be doing that. The Chiefs as well. Again, I commend the rookie GM for the Jets for saying, you need to meet this price. I'm not coming down from it. If you want this talent, this is the price. And he held firm on that. And I appreciate him holding firm on a third-round pick for Breece Hall. For Kansas City, just trade the third-round pick. It's a difference of 40, 30 spots. It's really not the end of the world here, especially if you're trading your own third-round pick. It's going to be essentially a fourth-round pick anyways. So I'm surprised that, one, they couldn't get the deal done with a fourth and a seventh. I think it's fine with the Jets, personally. It's not a third, but at least it's fourth and a seventh. And for the Chiefs, it's just give up the third-round pick. There's no reason not to. Pacheco's hurt right now. He's been dealing with injury this entire season. Address that. I think we're both in agreement that the Chiefs were a bit disappointing because if you weren't going to do much, it's okay. You've been looking better the past couple of weeks, but you have a need at running back. Go out and get Breece Hall. It's a third-round pick. It's not gonna kill you. The Chiefs are still the Chiefs. And then the last, just overall thing that I want to talk about here, and we could talk a little. The NFC West, I don't want to go too overtime. I like what the Seahawks did. The Rams and Niners, the Niners are just injured to heck and back. And I would have expected them to try to be a little more active just to fill some of those injury holes. But it is what it is. There's only so much availability. And the NFL trade deadline, you don't really see too many moves. This is honestly one of the more busier days that we've seen in the past. And that's really only 8 trades that happened over those 24 hours leading up to the trade deadline. The Rams, I was kind of expecting to make a splash or try to go all in, but I do understand that they have their cap problems. The NFC North, what are you guys doing? Come on. What are we doing? You have the Packers at 5-2-1, the Lions at 5-3, the Bears at 5-3, and the Vikings at 4-4. The division's up for grabs. I was hoping that they would be in an arms race to try to get some more pieces, and I guess the Packers already made their big move. They got Mike Parsons early around when the season started, just before the season started. The Lions are getting healthy again, so they're getting additions in-house. But for the Bears and Vikings, I don't see why you can't just dabble a little bit and try to build things up. The division's within reach. So those are 2 divisions I was a little disappointed on the action, especially the NFC North, where the Bears are looking better. They didn't utterly collapse versus the Bengals, which was crazy. And you look at the Lions, every year's an all-in year for them now. So I was a little surprised to see the NFC North be rather quiet. But again, I think the NFL, we see much more action around the NFL draft than we do in the trade deadline. A lot more teams look to make their big swings around free agency in the NFL draft than they do the trade deadline. And although this was a busier trade deadline, I think that was reflective again. Right. He was flipped from the Ravens to the Eagles. Yeah. Yeah, I think I just set the bar too high because, again, Rafi mentions take a shot. Rafi mentions that he likes the NHL and pays attention to the NHL a lot. Is about to make an NHL reference, but the NHL trade deadline, and I guess we can rope in the NBA trade deadline as well, and even the MLB trade deadline. Those are all much more. There's a lot more that goes on, and a lot more. I think there's a couple trades that typically are the caliber as we saw with the Sauce Gardner and Quentin Williams trades. but there's typically a lot more that's going on where you're seeing 15 to 20 trades that go on within the 24 hours leading up to the deadline, 24 to 48 hours. So I do think that other sports leagues are much more willing to make those trades. And I think part of that does come down to where you're at in the season. Maybe if there's a little more clarity, maybe if the NFL trade deadline was pushed a few weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks in the future, maybe there'd be more sellers. Maybe the buyers would be a little more aggressive just because right now you see a lot of teams that are still within reach of their divisions, albeit 2 or 3 wins out. So there's still that, well, if we can get healthy and, oh, well, if we're moving in the right direction, we've won a couple of games, so if we keep this going, we could potentially. But for the NBA, NHL, MLB, once you get to the trade deadline, you've played already 3/4 of the season. You kind of know who is good and who is bad, who's going to be buyers, who are going to be sellers. So I personally would like to see the NFL trade deadline move a few weeks. I know it's hard for players. You're learning a new system. You only have a couple of weeks to learn it, but that is something that I personally would like to see going forward, is potentially moving that back a few weeks. $100%. So with that, that'll do it for this edition of the Benchwarmer Sports Podcast. Went a little over time, but that's perfectly fine because there was. It's always a good time. We're here for a good time, as the great Pitbull would say. Not here for a long time, but here for a good time. Quoted by Pitbull. Shout out Pitbull. If you want to ever come onto the podcast, more than happy to have you on, Pitbull. So, Mr. Worldwide, Mr. 305. We hope you're listening to this podcast. But anyways, that'll do it for this edition of the Benchwarmer Sports Podcast. Let us know your guys' thoughts on the NFL trade deadline. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to also follow us on TikTok at Benchwarmer_sports. For Davian, I'm Raffi. We hope you enjoyed this edition of the Benchwarmer Sports Podcast. Have a good one, and we'll catch you on the next one. See ya.